So we're going to spend some time today really focused on a couple things in particular, but I'm going to start by sort of introducing myself. My name is Alan Goodman with the EC2 product management team. Along with me, I have Damian Wiley, who's going to be joining me later, also from the EC2 product management team. And today, what we're going to do is, real briefly at least, I'm going to start by just kind of walking you through some recent enhancements that we've provided for you. And then we're going to jump really mostly into these two new capabilities that we're launching this week, or announcing, excuse me, this week. EC2 Dedicated Hosts, which is a new capability inside EC2, which enables you to bring your licenses into AWS, as well as an additional capability called Run Command, which is a new manageability capability that we're providing, which makes it really easy to configure and manage servers at scale. Okay. So let's take a look briefly, looking back. This gives you a sort of a view into some of the things that we've provided relatively recently across sort of various aspects of EC2. Sort of starting here on the left, on the manageability side of things, we launched the ability to have your instances domain joined or automatically joined to a domain at the time of launch, which we've heard from a lot of customers has been really helpful in terms of bootstrapping their instances and getting them up and running relatively easily. We've enhanced our integration with System Center as well, for those of you using System Center. Maybe a brief show of hands. Any System Center users in the? Okay. And then we also made it the ability to bring your MSDN licenses into AWS available earlier this year as well. And then one of the bigger sort of capabilities or offerings that we added was SQL Server Enterprise support. This was, obviously something we hadn't had prior to that, and we've heard a lot of good feedback about that. Also added support for 32-bit OSs. This is something that, especially with Server 2003 support ending, that we've seen a lot of sort of interest in this, and we also continue to have support for Server 2003 running on EC2, 32-bit and other versions as well, both of 2003 as well as 2008 32-bit as well. And then finally, we added support for all the additional instance types or instance platforms that we launched over the last little bit: T2, C4, D2, M4. Okay, so that's sort of looking backwards. As I said, we really want to focus most of the session on the two new capabilities. So with that, I'm going to invite Damian up to talk about dedicated hosts.
Thank you, Alan. Hi, everyone. My name is Damian Wiley. I'm a product manager for Amazon EC2. As you've heard, we are pre-announcing a new EC2 feature. It is called an EC2 Dedicated Host. And with this feature, among other capabilities that you can use this feature for, it provides customers a route to bring in their own software licenses and use them in EC2. Many customers want this capability because you have sunk investments in various software licenses today, and previously you weren't able to use these in EC2. Some of these licenses include SUSE, Linux Enterprise Server, Windows Server, SQL Server, Oracle Database, and many others. And one of the reasons why you want to move these in is because you either want to just get some more value out of these sunk investments that were locked inside your on-premise or colo environment, or B, this is actually the most frequently heard reason, is that you either have better access to software pricing on your own, and as a result, you can save a lot of money if you can reuse these licenses in EC2. And we also understand that there's some restrictions in your way, and we'll talk about those. So this gives a kind of a high-level summary of some of the primary restrictions that you may face when you're using your own server licenses in any environment, for that matter. For example, it may require the use of a dedicated server. What that means is you're the only customer running on that physical machine. Every machine that you touch with these operating systems is subject to licensing. So if you can imagine a cloud environment where you have no control over the physical servers and what those software licenses touch, that could be very, very costly if you have to navigate this requirement. Another really nuanced feature that restriction that we've seen is that your license can't move from physical machine within a 90-day period, and that's the case with Windows Server. And that you're also licensing based on the number of physical cores or sockets. And today we expose virtual cores. And so these are just some of the common challenges that you may recognize in relation to using your own licenses in a cloud environment. Now let's talk about how EC2 Dedicated Hosts solves these problems for you. So starting with the definition, it is a physical server with EC2 capacity dedicated for your use. So you benefit from the flexibility of EC2, the power to scale physical machines across the world on command. And we've heard that customers think of this as it's not bare metal, but what this is you get EC2 instances. Think of it kind of like a package of capacity where you tell EC2, hey, I want a C4 extra large host, and every instance on that host is going to be configured as a C4 extra large. And in the case for C4, you would receive eight instances, or you'd have the capability to launch 8 instances onto that host. So a couple of the features that allow you to navigate those licensing requirements we just talked about. One is you have full control over the number of physical servers that are provisioned into your account at any given point in time. So you tell EC2, you say, hey, I want 4 of these C4 machines, and that's it. And then users can then launch onto these physical machines through the use of a new tenancy called host. That way you can control how many physical machines are obviously allocated, but that'll keep a cap on your licensing costs, assuming that you're launching onto your dedicated hosts. You also have a feature that is not only applicable to licensing, but other scenarios where you have full control over placement, which means that if EC2 gives you a host, you can target that host if you want with an instance launch. So you have the capability to target, but then you also have the capability to let EC2 do that work for you. So if you're not concerned about where your instances are relative to physical servers, but you just want them on these hosts, you can let EC2 do that automatically. One of the restrictions that I talked about before around the 90-day reassignment rule is that you can minimize your risk in that scenario using an affinity. And affinity is a new feature that we're providing with this, where you can set an affinity between an instance and a host. And what that allows you to do is when you stop that instance, it will only restart back onto that same physical machine. So as you can imagine, in a licensing scenario, you may not want an instance to go off and land on different machines. But that's also very useful for the scenario where you have a very well-designed placement scheme, and you want that placement scheme to persist over time. And as you can see here, we'll tell you the host ID for each of these physical servers. you'll get a socket count and a core count. And you'll also have the capability to see where your instances are on these physical servers and how they're being utilized over time. Let's walk through the bring your own license process. And this is just a very general way to think about bring your own license. There's different, so for example, in the first step here, there's going to be different scenarios that apply to different software licenses. So when you're, for example, in step 1, you can import your image using our VM import tooling, or you can also, in certain cases, you can download the software directly to an instance, or buy the, or not buy, you can get the image off of the AWS Marketplace. So part of this process is you're using your own media, and so that's step 1. So step 2 is really important, and this has to do with your capability to track usage of your licenses over time. So if you need to true up with your licensing provider or just keep track of how your licenses are being used, use AWS Config, and we highly recommend that you activate AWS Config before you start launching instances of your own software on dedicated hosts. What AWS Config will do is it will create this relationship or keep track of the relationship of your instances and the hosts over time, and you can use that as an output, as an input for your software licensing usage recording. Next step is you allocate hosts, and this can be done in the console. It can be done via API. And as I mentioned, you have, I'll get into the availability shortly, but the next step is you just launch instances just like you would normally do through the console or API onto dedicated hosts through a new tenancy option called host. I mentioned AWS Config is a very powerful tool. It can also be used in various scenarios, not just licensing. So if you want to discover the resources that were used over time, how those resources related to others in the AWS environment, it's a very useful tool. The guys over there are amping up the capabilities, as you've heard, with AWS Config rules this week. And this can also be used for audit and compliance use cases. So if you need to go back in time and look and see what happened, where and why, AWS Config will provide that information. Now there's 2 payment options for hosts. The first is on demand, where you pay by the host per hour, and you allocate hosts. You can allocate them across the world and then deprovision without risk, which is a really powerful capability. And the next option is reservations, where you can save up to 70% on your bill by purchasing a 1 or 3 year reservation. The standard upfront payment terms apply, including the no upfront option. And one slight difference with host is that we're providing you the capability to assign a reservation to a specific host, and that gives you full control over the asset. So meaning you have the asset that's in our data center that you're using and you can repeatably use over time, and then you have the capability to tie a payment option specifically to that asset. It's going to be available worldwide, excluding two regions initially, our China and GovCloud region. And it'll be available in these current generation instance families. Now this slide here is more of a summary over your licensing options related to Microsoft. This is indexed on Microsoft, and we know that's a very popular use case for many of you. So the first one is you can buy licenses from AWS. You don't have to manage licensing compliance. The licensing cost is included in the cost of the instance. You pay as you go. You can use these in dedicated or in our multi-tenant instances. You don't need to pay for software assurance, and you have unlimited client access licenses when you're using license-included instances from AWS. So that's a very powerful, flexible option for you. We're offering the capability for you to bring in your own. And as I mentioned, and I'll show some stats here in a second, you can save a lot of money if you're able to, one, reuse software that you have already paid for, or you just have better access to software pricing than you can pay for through EC2. Now with this, you manage the licensing compliance with your ISV, and another benefit of bringing your licenses into dedicated hosts is you don't need software assurance, because license mobility really applies to the use of your licenses in a multi-tenant environment. Dedicated hosts is a dedicated environment where it's dedicated to your use. Lastly, there's a hybrid option here where you can leverage license mobility. And this is through software assurance, a package that you would buy through Microsoft, where you can take a EC2 Windows Server instance that you've paid through our own licensing model, and then bring in your own SQL Server application and run that on top of our Windows Server instances. And that's another option that can enable you to save money on your licensing costs and give you the flexibility you need. I'll leave you with this. We've seen customers under a private program that we've ran over the last couple of months that they're able to save up to 42% on their licensing costs. Actually, I think this was on their total bill for EC2 related to the instances that they were using. There's more information about dedicated hosts online, and you can find the link there at the bottom. And I mentioned that we're supporting Microsoft licenses and various other license types. And I'd like to bring up David Torres from SUSE to talk to you about how dedicated hosts and bring your own licensing applies to SUSE customers.
Great, thank you, Damien. So my name is David Torres. I'm with SUSE. I support public cloud alliances for SUSE. And if you're not familiar with SUSE, we're an open source Linux company. We have over 13,000 enterprise customers, 10,000 certified ISV applications in our catalog. And we're also the #1 platform for SAP on Linux with over 70% market share. So I want to talk to you today a little bit about bring your own subscription, and I want to cover that as well. Since we're an open source company, we don't technically sell a license, we sell a subscription. And with that subscription, you get an entitlement, right, to maintenance updates, engineering support, and patching. So what we've seen, at least at SUSE, we've seen a lot of interest in bring your own. You know, our customers have made significant investments in, multi-year subscriptions, and they're asking for the ability and the flexibility to port those subscriptions to clouds, specifically AWS, and we're seeing a ton of interest in that. So with bring your own, we feel it gives customers, definitely will give customers the flexibility, right, to move those subscriptions to AWS, and also leverage your existing relationships you have with your vendors, such as a SUSE. So, in your world, it's kind of the best of both worlds, because you can still engage your vendor, SUSE, with support issues, any issues with the kernel, but also, leverage your AWS teams that are supporting your infrastructure as well. And with bring your own, there's significant cost savings. If you know that you're going to invest heavily over the next 2 to 3 years with your vendor, that gives you the ability to kind of leverage getting those heavy discounts, but then also getting to apply those, and move those subscriptions as well. And something else we're seeing, at least in the market, in the enterprise market, is, this first wave of applications, web applications, moved to the cloud. Now we're seeing, the second wave of legacy in the data center applications, and customers are now wanting to move those applications as well. Talk a little bit about the announcement we have at reInvent. So we also are making available bring your own subscription for SUSE Linux Enterprise Server for SAP applications. And this is a joint collaboration with SAP, SUSE, and AWS to make this available as a bring your own offer. And included in this offer, we're including a preview of HA agents that allow you to allow your SAP instances to fail over between AWS availability zones. And we feel it's a perfect workload for dedicated hosts, being that an enterprise application such as SAP is a resource hog, and now having that visibility right into your dedicated hosts and the resources you have with that host, it really is a nice match with bring your own and dedicated hosts. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Alan. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. So we're going to shift gears here one more time. So I think so we covered some of the licensing pieces and particular dedicated hosts. Now we're going to take a look at an additional new capability that we're announcing this week, called Run Command. And we're going to kind of shift to kind of talk about new management capabilities, and in particular, remote server management at scale. Okay. So when we started down this path, we talked to a lot of customers and wanted to hear what some of their challenges were with managing servers, and in particular around configuration management. And what we heard was that while most of our customers are very heavily invested in templatizing and desired state-based sort of deployment and all that great stuff, that they still needed some kind of capability to implement configuration changes on servers on an ad hoc basis. And they wanted to do so in a way that was secure, that was reliable in terms of making sure that the changes are rolled out in a very consistent manner, that they're not at the same time opening up, let's say, RDP or SSH access to all their servers, and really sort of creating this larger sort of blast radius, if you will, for implementing change. They needed some way to control who was doing what and where, and finally also having visibility into what was actually being done. So with all that sort of feedback, we implemented Run Command, which is a remote administration tool. It allows you to run actions on your instances remotely. These actions can be from a set of building block actions that we've built in. We'll take a look at that list in a second. Or it can be quite simply any PowerShell script that you write as well. All this capability is available from the EC2 API CLI console. So we wanted to make it as simple to use as possible as well. And very simply, you can delegate complete control or access through IAM policies as well. So we wanted to make sure it was secure, controlled, and then also very consistent and easy to use with all the visibility that you need into what's going on. So from the centralized place, you can see the status of every sort of interaction for rolling out these actions across fleets of servers. So let's take a quick look at what are some of the actions that we have built into the product. So install MSIs, real simply, make it really easy to remotely install and configure or bootstrap software, configuring Windows Update, the ability to very easily deploy PowerShell modules, joining instances to domains, and also configuring the CloudWatch logs agent. And then finally, for anything that's not on that list, as I said, you have the ability to roll your own with just writing PowerShell commands. The nice thing is, with all of these, you can then actually go ahead and create your own custom actions, which all get the same security benefits, all the ease of use, all the other things that we kind of talked about. And the idea here is we want you to be able to sort of develop and test and encapsulate the various sort of pieces of functionality that you need into these well-understood and well-tested units of activity, and then be able to apply the same permissions and track and use those actions very reliably and predictably. So here's just a small set of ideas of things that we've heard customers want to be able to do with run command, and whether it's installing and bootstrapping instances with various third-party agents or other software, whether those agents are for things like backup or things of that nature, or other management software. Could be other configuration management services and capabilities, local user groups and permissions. So you lock an account, you can use run command to unlock that account. You can easily collect or gather information from instances. So a good example of this that we've heard from customers is in the case of a zero-day exploit, the patch is made available, or sorry, excuse me, before the patch is made available, but the vulnerability is understood, you can actually create a command to go run against a fleet of servers to detect whether those servers are vulnerable and report back. This way you can very quickly and easily gather all the information needed to sort of support and figure out how to actually roll out a patch once it's available. There's some additional items here, but really the list goes on and on. It's pretty flexible and easy to use. So with all of that, wanted to just kind of summarize some of the benefits. So first, secure. There's a couple of pieces to this. As I kind of mentioned just before, the first part of secure is we wanted to help enable enhancing the security of your servers by reducing the amount of times your administrators are actually touching explicitly servers, or at least directly, whether it be through RDP, SSH, or other mechanisms. So that's one. Two, we have the IAM integration as well, which allows you to control who has access to what and against what physical servers, or what servers. As well as finally also, the way we interact with each of the instances is actually from the instance out. So you don't have to open up any firewall ports. You don't have to change any of your security group rules. It's actually all from the instance back to the cloud. So it's also secure from that standpoint as well. Reliability. This is really about rolling out and implementing change consistently across the board, which makes sure that your workloads themselves are going to also be very reliable and predictable. Obviously, the more ad hoc scripts are and the more ad hoc change that is being implemented is, the results will be less predictable and ultimately less reliable. We also want to make it very easy to sort of track and get visibility into the status of rolling out of configuration changes. So we provide a very simple experience for seeing lots of detail. So the output of any one of those actions, along with, on the script side, output of the standard out and all the other details from your scripts, so that you can easily sort of figure out what happened, what might have succeeded, what might have failed, and what to do as a result of that. Run command is very scalable, makes it very easy to roll out change across fleets of instances very easily through a single command. And it's very easy to use. It's available through the EC2 API, console, and CLI. And finally, it's customizable. You can create your own actions and inherit sort of the benefits of all the built-in capabilities as well. So run command is going to be available at launch with support for pretty much every version of Windows, including back to 2003. It'll be available in the Virginia, Oregon, and Ireland regions, at least initially, and then we'll look to sort of expand that as we go. And then now I'm going to actually jump in and do a quick demo as well, so we can take a look at run command. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to log in here to my workspace. Okay. First, we're going to just take a brief look at what it's like to run a run command from PowerShell. So what I have here is 2 single commands that you need to issue. The first one is actually just getting a list of instances that you want to target to run a command on. So in this case, what I'm actually doing is just calling describe instances, which is the standard EC2 API for getting instances. And I'm reducing that list to include only instances where I've set up a tag called environment, and I'm only interested in the instances that have the value production. So that's the first command. And then the second one is then the actual invocation of that command. And so what I'm doing with that one is actually running a PowerShell script, which is very simple, which is just calling ipconfig. Okay? And it's going to target, in this case, all those instances. Now if I jump over to the EC2 console, can actually start by taking a look real quick at what the output of this looks like. So what you see here is a history of commands that have been executed. You can drill in and see what instance was targeted, what was actually executed, the status of it, as well as drill in and actually see the detailed output. So you can collect and respond to status as you go. And then real quick, we also have a really easy to use experience for launching commands. So commands are actually implemented in what we call documents. When you go to invoke a command, you can pick from the list of documents that you have available. What you see there is all the options with the AWS dash prefix. Those are all the built-in documents. And then I actually created my own custom document in my environment that does an IIS reset, for example. And because these are parameterizable, we wanted to make the experience really simple. So depending on the document that I pick, we're actually inspecting those documents and rendering a simple-to-use form so that the folks that are invoking commands don't have to be totally aware of the contents of the script. We make it really easy to collect parameters from them by dynamically generating forms based on the parameters, along with the ability for authors of commands to include some basic help text so that folks know what each of these things do. So I'm going to actually jump back and choose my custom document here, which doesn't happen to have any parameters, so you can see that kind of clears up and goes away. Then I'm going to go ahead and pick the instances I want to target. And so you see here are some of the instances in my environment. What you see also is our current status in terms of our ability to communicate with them. So we also make it clear what the current, at least, response from the instance that you're trying to target. And one thing to note as well that's nice is if you're in the middle of rebooting a server or server's off, we'll actually queue those commands until a server comes back online. If for any reason at any point you want to cancel that queued command, you can go ahead and cancel queued or running commands. So I'm going to pick 2 different instances here. We provide an easy way to annotate each of your commands. So for example, fixing a bug. This way you can also, when you're looking back at history, try and figure out why something might have been done. We have some additional other parameters here, so you can set a timeout. You can also target an S3 bucket. And what that would do is take all the logs across all the instances that you run a command on and centrally ship those up to that S3 bucket for you so that you can either debug or run through those logs from a central location as opposed to having to go collect those all remotely from the various instances in your environment. And then finally, all I'm going to do is click Run. In this case, I've decided to sort of skip over those last few pieces. And if I refresh here, you can see the two IIS reset commands since I picked two different instances. And then again, if I click on that, I can drill in. And since commands here, your documents can actually support multiple commands. In this case, I only have the one. I have the one detailed output where you can see that IIS was actually restarted, and you see the output of that. Okay, so that's sort of the demo of run command. And that's really what we wanted to kind of talk you through today. So 2 new features around licensing and dedicated hosts, and then run command. And we'll open it up for questions here in a second, but look forward to getting your feedback, and feel free to stop by the booth or grab us afterwards as well. But with that, I guess we'll open it up to questions.